Hey, what's good, self-direct investors? I hope you're all doing great, and I want to welcome you back to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Jordan. I'm the mind behind Make More Capital, and today I'm coming at you with a midweek update based on what we've seen this week in cannabis. So before we jump in, if you enjoy this video or you learn something, please just leave a like on it as it really helps out my channel. And then of course, if you want to learn how to take advantage of this generational investment opportunity, subscribe below so that you don't miss any future videos. And then there's plenty of content for you to go back, rewatch, and educate yourself with. I've put all the facts and news releases in one place for you so that you can get familiar, learn about the different companies, and potentially take advantage yourself. So today we're going to start though that Time magazine has released its 100 most influential companies of 2021. I was very happy to see this as I was scrolling through in the pioneer stage. Next to Roblox and Bumble, we have the post-merger Tilray, which is said to be commanding the cannabis market. Now, I know I spent a majority of my time talking about US multi-state operators, but obviously there are companies in Canada that in the long run will end up prevailing based on the niche that they've chosen to get into. And obviously the one that I've been vocal about is Aphria, which will eventually become Tilray post-merger. But I just found this interesting and wanted to highlight it because obviously it really just costs money to be featured in a 100 companies of 2021 list like this. Other than that, it's really just paying for the exposure. Mind you, Time magazine is a very reputable source, and let's just read into this quickly. Irwin Simon, so it starts off talking about Aphria. Irwin Simon was best known for creating a good food giant before signing on to head Aphria, a cannabis company based in Canada where recreational cannabis is legal. Separately, Brendan Kennedy went to Nanaimo, British Columbia to launch Tilray after co-founding a private equity firm to buy cannabis startups. And this private equity firm, known as Privateer Holdings, eventually merged with Tilray. But firstly, this company that came first, Privateer Holdings, was backed by Peter Thiel, one of the billionaires behind the Founders Fund, early Facebook investor. So that's where the money to pay for this exposure is coming from. Now, they're merging the two to form the world's largest cannabis company by annual revenue, more than $685 million. I think that's a typo. I think combined pro forma was supposed to be more than 800. Regardless, it's not all from cannabis. Very important to point out, which, in the long run is good, but still there's room to grow. The plan going forward involves supporting studies that might widen approved medical targets like epilepsy, pain, and anxiety, and marketing consumer products like THC-infused drinks wherever recreational cannabis goes legit. So anyways, just wanted to point that out. Very cool that at least a cannabis company is getting exposure as one of the most influential. Obviously, it doesn't say anything about the MSOs because the MSOs didn't bother paying to get exposed in this article. They're letting their actions on the ground do the talking for them. But welcome to the world of media and storytelling. Now, Marijuana Moment reports that advocates float new strategy to pass cannabis legalization in the Senate with Democratic support in question. So this one's a bit long. I'm going to read through the whole thing. But as Senate leaders work to draft a bill to federally legalize cannabis, there is an elephant in the room. Even with Democrats in control of the chamber, the votes might not be there to enact comprehensive reform. Recognizing the potential challenges of mustering 60 votes to overcome a filibuster for standalone legislation on the floor, advocates are urging leadership to pursue the policy change through a process known as budget reconciliation that would require a simple majority of 51 votes for a broader must-pass package. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, who is spearheading the legalization push in his chamber, didn't rule out that possibility at a press conference last week. Asked whether senators might try to incorporate the cannabis proposition into reconciliation, he said, "You'll hear in a few weeks the legislation that'll answer that question." So as he has gone from saying shortly to soon to near future to few weeks, this is the clip of him actually saying that.
Again. The bonus.
Sorry, you can't hear the question.
Well, I do want to bring marijuana legislation, legalization, decriminalization legislation to the floor, and you will hear in a few weeks the legislation. It'll answer part of your second question that Senators Booker and Wyden and I will put forward.
So that is where that quote of a few weeks came from. This is an option the Cannabis Justice Coalition shared with the Majority Leader Maritza Perez, Director of the Office of National Affairs for the Drug Policy Alliance, told Marijuana Moment. The way we see it, a must-pass bill is the only vehicle that can ensure we pass a cannabis justice bill in this Senate. And I think they know that it's important to get voted back in. They need to do this. So they're looking at all their possible avenues. Chris Lindsay, Director of Government Relations for the Marijuana Policy Project, told Cannabis Moment that it's clear Leader Schumer is taking seriously his commitment to see legalization happen at the federal level and address the ongoing harm from prohibition. We have no doubt he is looking at all the vehicles necessary to accomplish this reform. But while going with the reconciliation route might seem like a simple workaround that would relieve pressure to garner Republican supporters, the legislative process is complex and with a series of rules that limit what kind of measures can be enacted under the procedure in the first place. The so-called Byrd Rule determines whether a given proposal is an extraneous matter that's not germane to the budget process. There are several criterion that are used to make that determination, including whether the legislation would add to the deficit beyond a 10-year budget window. Clearly, legalizing and taxing cannabis would not add to the deficit. If anything, it would provide a bit of a surplus in a lot of areas where deficits are likely currently coming from. If a senator opposed to legalization wanted to block the cannabis language from being included in the broader package based on this procedural rule, they would have to raise a point of order. The Senate parliamentarian would then make a determination in consultation with the presiding officer of the chamber. If they deem the language in violation of the Byrd Rule, it would be stricken from the reconciliation bill. Assuming that the forthcoming legalization measure survives a challenge under those reconciliation limitations, it's possible it will face a separate hurdle. Under any process, any member can introduce an amendment, and they must all be considered on the floor in a lengthy process known as a votorama. What an unoriginal name. Are you okay with making this change? Everyone to the votorama. That means if the senator opposed to cannabis reform chooses to, they could force a vote on an amendment calling for the legalization language to be stripped, which would then require a simple majority to defeat it. That might sound easy enough given that Democrats now hold the majority, but there's yet another complication. Some members of the party have signaled that they're not on board with federal legalization. Now, something positive to consider is that it is the same two senators that were mentioned in previous articles that I've talked about last week, Senator Jean Shaheen and John Tester, simply two politicians showing that they are stuck in their ways, they do not want to move along with the times, and they have not looked at the new data and simply are being told whatever is being fed by Big Pharma likely into their pockets. And then on top of that, Joe Manchin, Bob Casey, and Mark Kelly are still undecided on the issue. Now, there are a number of Democratic senators who just said that they haven't looked closely enough at the issue of federal legalization to say how they would vote. Another example, Dianne Feinstein, Democrat from California, a longtime opponent to legalization who in recent years came around to sponsoring some reform legislation, represents another question mark for Democratic leaders. Now again, these are not no's, these are just question marks that have to be educated and swung in the right direction. Losing any single one of those lawmakers would jeopardize the bill even if only 50 votes are required, with Vice President Kamala Harris as the tiebreaker. As for any Democrat that they lose, Schumer would have to pick up a Republican to get back to 50. Senator Rand Paul supports cannabis reform, and he said he's one of the possible gets. How lame that they talk that way. I might be one of the possible gets if you can sway me enough. This session, though he questioned why his Democratic colleagues haven't reached out to him on the issue, and his libertarian leanings could give him pause about supporting any proposal to tax cannabis and use the proceeds to repair the harms of the war on drugs. Yeah, sure, just don't use any of the money we make to right the past wrongs we created. But simply, if senators move to incorporate legalization into a budget package via reconciliation, things could get messy, but it may be their only possible path to success given the alternative standalone route and the 60-vote threshold to end the filibuster. Meanwhile, Senator Cory Booker said on Tuesday that he's pretty confident that we could get the 50 votes of the Democrats for broad cannabis reform, but also seemed to suggest that the bill might actually be brought to the floor under regular order and would need to overcome a filibuster. We've got to pick another 10 votes. Now, the good news is that there are Republican bright red states that have legalized cannabis recently, he said at a 420 event, and that should give us some advantage in trying to cobble together the kind of majority that we need. I'm going to do everything I can to cobble together the 60 votes necessary, unless, of course, we somehow get rid of the filibuster, which would be wonderful. Justin Streekel, political director for NORML, told Cannabis Moment that no senator's vote should be taken for granted and that supporters need to make it clear that they expect their elected officials to represent their supporters' views, no matter how cannabis reform proceeds to the floor. As all procedural possibilities are explored, one thing is certain. Far too many U.S. senators believe it to be acceptable to arrest and incarcerate Americans for cannabis possession, he said. Now is the time for each and every supporter, you, any American viewers of cannabis policy reform, to contact their elected officials and make it clear that they will be watching. Because at this point, if you still stand against this, it's just showing how outdated you are as a politician, and none of those politicians with those views and the inability to change their views when they learn new information should stand power in any sort of a democracy. Completely appalling. So Democrats were cleared by the Senate parliamentarian to do another reconciliation bill this year and seem poised to pursue this option in the coming months. But cannabis isn't the only issue that could be attached to the procedurally complicated legislation. Can include drug pricing, immigration reform, climate policy, and other issues, all on the table as Democrats step up to push their deliver wins and to push to deliver wins on infrastructure and jobs before the midterms. All things cannabis can help contribute to. House Budget Chairman John Yarmouth said the upcoming reconciliation package will be tantamount to a kitchen sink approach, throwing everything in it. As such, advocates say cannabis should be included. So folks, it appears there is a new way, there is hope. So we don't know how this is going to get done, but trust that the people working hard at this will do what they need to do, and they will play the game of politics how they've always played it to get to where they are in order to get this done. But just wanted to highlight some sales figures that are impressive and reiterate what's happening on the ground. Explosive March growth in Illinois and Michigan, legal cannabis sales in Midwest states. So just think about this. January 2020, Illinois legalized adult use, and they went from 40 million in sales to now 145 million in total sales. So a large portion of that coming from legal cannabis, while Michigan in January of 2020 had maybe roughly 35 million in sales, and they're also showing by January 2021, well, now April or March 2021, 144 million. So especially once you legalize that adult use market, it gives permission for the sales to skyrocket as a much larger population can get access and just buy it, try it for the first time, get a new experience. And on top of that, some unofficial figures out of Arizona reported by Ryan Randazzo. Arizona's Department of Revenue has numbers for February, the first full month of recreational cannabis sales, with some caveats though, estimating it at roughly 35.7 million in taxable sales. Some of that money was held over from the 10 days of rec sales in January, according to the DOR, and some vendors haven't yet paid their February taxes, according to the Department of Revenue. Now, medical cannabis sales in February in Arizona were 57.8 million, according to the DOR as well. That's using a new code, so can't be compared to February of 2020, but it's nice they get dollar figures from the state now, as opposed to just pounds sold from the health department. This report from the state also acknowledges that the previous figures released for the first 10 days of rec sales in January were low, and the Department of Revenue comments, "We are working with taxpayers to encourage appropriate filing and anticipate receiving returns and payments for the January and February periods in the future. We're not at a point that we can draw any conclusions from the revenue we've received yet, but it seems like they are working on it and figuring out a model so that eventually they can produce some accurate figures that we can end up going off of. Mind you, to end this, even knowing the total sales and tax figures are wonky because of collection issues, if you multiply the February rec sales by 12, you get an annual figure of 428 million, which is real close to projections from Headset.io, what Arizona was expecting in its first year of adult use cannabis sales. So another market basically with the floodgates open so that they can start those sales. You can check these links here if you want to grab them below. And just on top of that, Maryland medical sales hit 1 billion since launch, another key milestone. Maryland's medical cannabis industry in April reached more than 1 billion in total retail sales since launching 40 months earlier in December of 2017. The second $1 billion will take about half the time, predicted Maryland Medical Cannabis Commission Executive Director Tim Wilberg, the Baltimore Business Journal reported. Quarterly sales of 60.5 million in 2019 nearly doubled to quarterly sales of 115 million in 2020. Sales in the first 3 months of 2021 surpassed 135 million. While the quarterly sales increase has slowed, Tilburg says the industry is on pace to hit 550 million in sales this year. And Tilburg attributed the growth to more patients and more businesses. From December 2019 to January 2021, the state's pool of patients certified to receive medical cannabis swelled from 87,000 to 125,000, as Baltimore Business Journal reported. And again, this is just a market that only has medical cannabis legalized, and they are planning hopefully soon in the next few years to get legal adult use going as well, which will just contribute to those growing sales. Now, this comes from Benzinga, adult use cannabis sales in the US to surpass 30 billion by 2025, driven by eventual New Jersey, New York sale, and others. So in the last few months, we've seen a significant surge in the number of U.S. states with adult use cannabis as New Mexico, New York, Virginia, Arizona, Montana, and New Jersey move to legalize. These states will be responsible for a significant portion of the growth of the adult use market over the next 5 years, according to a recent report from the BrightField Group, which is stating that the national market is set to reach $30.6 billion by 2025. If we look at 2020, they did $17.5 billion. So that's close to 100% of growth based off of those figures alone in the next 5 years. Now, other key findings: despite the pandemic, adult use sales increased significantly from $7.2 billion in 2019 to $11.1 billion in 2020. Adult use cannabis sales are set to increase by another 27% in 2021. Notable catalysts for the growth from 2019 to 2020 included increased consumption among existing cannabis consumers and new retail openings, including the populous Midwestern states of Illinois and Michigan. Medical cannabis sales represent an increasingly smaller share of the overall cannabis market as adult use expands at a comparatively rapid rate, decreasing from 41.2% of all cannabis sales in 2020 to a projected 26.9% in 2025. Much of the growth in the U.S. cannabis market from 2021 to 2025, so this is growth that we will not even see yet, will come from states that recently passed adult legislation, especially population centers like New York and New Jersey beginning cannabis sales, and additional large states such as Pennsylvania passing and enacting legislation in the near future. So this is nice to see from BrightField Group. Obviously, they're optimistic about this growth that they're seeing in order to make these projections. Now, on top of that, these states could still legalize recreational or medical cannabis in 2021. And we have states possibly likely to do it still: Connecticut, Delaware, and Rhode Island, although very small states. Still good to see the progress. And of medical, we could even see Alabama and maybe North Carolina. So it's interesting, though, to see states where you wouldn't expect it coming to light and thinking, yeah, we might want to do this because it's the right thing to do. Several more states could legalize adult use or medical cannabis before their legislative sessions adjourn in 2021, possibly generating hundreds of millions of dollars in new business opportunities in the coming years. Now that New Jersey and New York have legalized, industry experts are keeping a close eye on East Coast states of Connecticut, Delaware, and Rhode Island. With Virginia and New Mexico already legalizing adult use through their legislators this year, together those two states are expected to generate around $2 billion in annual revenue in the first 5 years after sales begin. It's uncertain which, if any, additional state legislatures will actually pass bills this year, given the political dynamics can shift rapidly. For example, Connecticut seems a bit less likely to do so than a couple months ago, industry experts said, while Pennsylvania and Minnesota remain in play to legalize adult use markets as well, but passage appears unlikely, and this is more of an issue of because they have a Republican-controlled Senate that's standing in the way, and this is the issue in both states. But it's good to see more states coming on board, and just to highlight all of the positives that the industry is actually seeing, and the general consensus changing. More than 2/3 of Americans support recreational legalization, according to the Quinnipiac University National Poll of Adults released this month. Now that 40% of Americans live in a place where cannabis is legal for all adults, the pressure is on lawmakers at every level to act on the will of the people, which they're clearly making obvious, Wolf wrote in an email to MJ Biz Daily. Plus, the more states move on legalization, the more out of touch states that have yet to legalize appear, especially to the people living in their own state. O'Keefe added, as cannabis stores near state borders have parking lots full of license plates from their prohibitionist neighbors, the irony that these narrow-minded politicians are failing to see. It's a very clear illustration of the economic growth that states are ceding to their neighbors the longer that they fail to listen to voters, which is their damn job. State lawmakers are attracted to the tax revenues, jobs, and general economic development that legalization brings, plus the coronavirus pandemic, which has strained state budgets, also has put additional pressure on some state lawmakers and governors to act. And so just to highlight Minnesota and Pennsylvania, the two states that are making progress but are yet to actually see change this year, Minnesota cannabis legalization bill clears 9th House committee on path to the floor. So yet another House committee has approved a bill to legalize cannabis in the state, the 9th panel to advance the legislation since it was introduced in February. 9 of them. I'm sure that there's more that it's going to have to go through as well, but at least they're advancing and getting voted on for approval, which is good. And I guess the amendments that were voted on would allow adults 21 and older to purchase and possess up to 1.5 ounces of cannabis and cultivate up to 8 plants, 4 of which could be mature. But in a timely fashion, it appears politicians are seeing the light. As Winkler said, our efforts as a society and as a state to use the criminal justice system to ban, prohibit, and criminalize cannabis is a public policy failure. Truer words have never been said. Winkler said before the committee voted, as a public safety and criminal justice matter, cannabis prohibition has had a disproportionate effect on communities of color, especially black Minnesotans, and their current policy is a failure and it creates harm, which is why this bill is about correcting the harm of cannabis prohibition using the criminal justice system. And that's an absolute fact. Now, the next stop for this bill is another committee. Mind you, if the bill does make it all the way through the House, which it should, and likely is showing that it will, it's still expected to face a significant challenge in the Republican-controlled Senate, where lawmakers have signaled that they're more interested in revising the state's existing medical cannabis program than enacting legalization of adult use. Now, obviously, that is an issue to deal with in itself, but it's good to see that politicians are listening to the people of Minnesota, and that it is spreading awareness in the state. And on top of this, Pennsylvania cannabis poll shows the highest ever support for legalization. New poll results out of Pennsylvania show that nearly 6 in 10, 58% of adult residents support the complete legalization of cannabis in the Commonwealth, the highest level of support for legalization since the Muhlenberg College's annual public health poll began tracking the issue. The trend on support for legalizing of cannabis in Pennsylvania is clear, with support growing for the 8th year in a row. Chris Bowrick, director of the college's Institute for Public Opinion, said in a statement accompanying the survey results, as the state government considers this policy option, the public is increasingly common in the conclusion that they support legalization. Just over a quarter of respondents, 26%, that said that they were opposed to legalizing cannabis in Pennsylvania. Another 14 neither favored nor opposed legalization, while 3% said that they weren't sure. And the data shows us beautifully that over time, a record level 58% of adult Pennsylvanians support the legalization of cannabis in the Commonwealth. And as we can see, over time, the amount of people who are unsure has shrunk, the amount of people who are opposed have shrunk and have likely moved over to the side in favor, believing that, yeah, well, I guess most people do know what they're talking about, and as this new science does support that cannabis legalization does bring a lot of benefits, that's clearly where a lot of people are likely drawing that decision from. But just want to point out that anyone that's still not sure or opposing, for them, it's easier to just stick to their confirmation bias and check a box that validates their own stubborn opinion than to actually look for new information and change their mind. So again, these are the people just holding on to the past, really not wanting to let the future come, as it will. But this is great that over the 8th consecutive year, we're seeing progress in the right direction. But again, the main problem with Pennsylvania is that they have a Republican-controlled Senate as well. And that's why, again, just this year, it likely will not change. But this is where the people of Pennsylvania, it's their job to start paying attention to. They vote in and vote in people that are likely going to vote in policy in their favor. And Headset estimates Pennsylvania medical cannabis sales to exceed $900 million over the past year. And with close to $1 billion in sales in the last 12 months and growing at an incredible pace, we are thrilled to bring unprecedented insight into this exciting market, which can show us for the past 12 months, Pennsylvania's medical cannabis sales have escalated, and between April 2020 and March 2021, Pennsylvania's medical markets brought in $909 million. Pennsylvania stands out among other U.S. markets with the largest average basket sizes so far this year at $123.88 per basket, which is 2 times as high as Michigan's and 1.5 times as high as Oregon's. In addition, concentrates had the highest average price at $61, and tinctures, flowers, and vapor pens followed closely behind it with an average item price of more than $50. But again, with Headset's insights, and I recommend you use headset.io to use it for any research you're going to do. Headset Insights will help companies track Pennsylvania's cannabis medical market growth, product category sales and shares, basket size, and make more accurate projections of the U.S. medical cannabis market. And just think of the day when Pennsylvania does legalize for adult use. That will open up an entire new revenue stream and allow a large number of sales to add to this growth consistently month over month. It'll be a beautiful time. And another call to action from a governor, Tony Evers of Wisconsin, tweeting, "Our Badger Bounce Back agenda would legalize, regulate, and tax cannabis, much like we do with alcohol," which is just a no-brainer at this point. This could generate over $165 million in tax revenue starting in 2022, and we'd invest $80 million of that revenue back into our communities through equity initiatives. So more call to actions for cannabis helps change the narrative for the better. Now, news out of Dallas, Texas, their first medical cannabis clinic is now open, so I want to talk a little bit more and dive into this one just because it tells us more about what Texas currently has for their medical cannabis program right now and how we could see this change in the future based on individuals driving this change. So the Lone Star Cannabis Clinic is Dallas's first provider to specialize in prescribing medical cannabis to eligible patients. Patients who meet criteria set by the Texas legislature can book telemedicine appointments to see if medical cannabis is a good option for them. And just want a reminder, or just to point out, Texas has 29 million people, so that's a very big market that could open up in the next few years. The clinic, which cheekily opened on April 20th, was joined by a progressive stance towards cannabis prosecution in Dallas. Earlier this month, Dallas Police Chief Eddie Garcia began ordering his officers to stop charging those caught with small amounts of cannabis for personal use. Huge! If a person has fewer than 2 ounces of weed and there's no evidence that they intend to sell it, officers will confiscate the drug and send them on their way without a ticket or a trip to jail. This new approach comes 2 years after District Attorney John Cruzat announced his office would no longer prosecute small possession charges. Yet still, police continue charging residents caught with weed because they can't use their own discretion. They have to just blanketly abuse their power in every way possible. So what's funny is that the District Attorney's office since then has rejected 3,161 cases. Is there not a more clear way for the District Attorney to say, stop wasting your resources on things that don't matter anymore? Now, medical cannabis is legal in limited quantities and highly regulated within Texas. Only 2 medical cannabis distributors exist statewide, and both are limited to making tinctures, lozenges, and gummies for patients with specific diagnoses, terminal cancer, certain autism spectrum disorders, and other seizure disorders. But earlier this legislative session, a bill was unanimously passed out of a committee that qualifies all cancer patients, not just terminal, those who suffer from chronic pain, and veterans diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder. It would also allow the Texas Department of State Health Services to expand qualifying conditions further without legislative approval. It would raise the THC concentration for cannabis products from 0.5% to 5%. While it isn't a law and will need to pass both the House and the Senate, a unanimous bipartisan vote in a bipartisan committee is a good sign. Now, the Texas Compassionate Use Registry, which allows Texans to be prescribed THC, and again, 29 million people in the state, only has around 3,500 patients registered. Still, estimates say there are already 2 million eligible Texans. The new law would greatly expand the potential patient base. Now, Lone Star Director Dr. Christopher Chun is an anesthesiologist and interventional pain management physician specializing in treating chronic and acute pain. He says he has a passion for expanding access to less easily abused treatments for pain and nausea, trying to avoid prescribing opioids when possible. Chun studied the registry number of patients and providers and saw an opportunity to serve those patients. The amount of patients and need compared to the amount of physicians that prescribe is a vast difference, Chun says, as he eyes opportunity. Cha-ching! It's an underserved patient population in regards to this alternative therapy. And get this, it's not about money. It's about a doctor realizing how he can better serve his patients, and once he realizes that and just makes that a reality, the money will follow. And one of Chen's goals is to focus on patient education. He wants to ensure those who are eligible understand their options and the legality and possibilities of medical cannabis, which in many ways is as effective and less dangerous and less addictive than opioids. So talk about individuals making a difference and bringing upon change. Hopefully more legislative change in Texas does follow. And on the topic of providing medical value, let's get scientific. As the study did out of McGill University, the effects of delta-9 tetrahydrocannabinol and cannabidiol in symptomatic insomnia caused by neuropathic pain. Neuropathic pain is a major health problem that results in a high degree of suffering, physical and psychosocial impairments, and exorbitant healthcare costs. Also, patients who suffer from neuropathic pain experience sleep disturbances. Only a restricted number of drugs are available for treating NP-associated insomnia, and side effects are common. While preclinical and clinical studies indicate that THC and CBD possess both analgesic and hypnotic effects. However, their mechanisms of action in models of NP are not fully understood yet. In this study, for the first time, they demonstrated that animals with neuropathic pain also develop sleep disturbances characterized by a decrease in non-rapid eye movement sleep and rapid eye movement sleep and an increase in wakefulness. Successfully, they investigated the effects of CBD and THC in both chronic pain and comorbid insomnia. Specifically, microinjection of THC into the ventrolateral periaqueductal gray decreased the firing activity of on cells and activated the firing of off cells in the retroventral medulla. Unlike THC, CBD reduced the ongoing activity of both on and off neurons in anesthetized neuropathic pain rats. These findings suggest that THC and CBD have potential in the treatment of neuropathic pain and comorbid insomnia. All that to figure out what we already know. Yes, cannabis will help with pain and insomnia. So let's deschedule it so that we can get moving on these studies. On to MSOs. What's new? Which cannabis stocks should you be buying? Stick to U.S. multi-state operators. This seems to be a common trend. that we hear, especially from analysts. We're overthinking cannabis investments. The United States is the markets investors should hang their hat on. Yes, I believe there is a Canadian name and an international name to consider, but the multi-state operators, MSOs, in the US have the biggest market and the biggest opportunity. Already, numbers here are crushing it in terms of both revenue and growth. What's more amazing is that cannabis isn't even federally legal and dozens of states still don't allow sales or allow medical sales. There's plenty of upside still to be had. Now again, I'm not saying that you should buy any of the companies that this article is referring to, but I recommend that you go watch multiple videos, and if you notice many companies pop up and there seems to be positive talk about them, that's a good reason for you to then further look into that company. Just pointing that out. These results can be seen in the recent quarterly and annual report from a top name on the list, Cresco Labs. The company turned in 2020 revenue of $476.3 million, an increase of 271 year over year. The average sales number per store in the fourth quarter was 3.6 million, which produced EBITDA of 50 million for the quarter alone, bringing the total to 116 million on the year. Operating activities threw off cash of over 21 million for the quarter. These are numbers that Canadian licensed producers can only dream about. Fact, they're not there yet. And there are several other US MSOs on top of Cresco Labs, Curaleaf, AYR Wellness, Green Thumb Industries, they mentioned TrueLeaf, Cannabis down here, as these names are seeing strong revenue growth, profitability, and have the ability to expand as more states legalize both medical and recreational cannabis. And the fact that these companies can't uplist to US major exchanges is a disgrace, but obviously the simplest approach is to just buy Advisor Shares Pure US Cannabis ETF MSOS if you want direct exposure in all of the top cannabis providers. But outside of that, you've got Grow Generation, Hydro Farm, Planet 13, Innovative Industrial, which is a real estate investment trust. The industry is growing in all areas. So let's see what other MSOs are happy about. AYR Wellness announces the opening of its milestone 50th dispensary. The new location is AYR's 34th in Florida and brings AYR's total retail dispensary to a milestone of 50 stores across 7 states, including the pending acquisition in New Jersey. This comes after AYR Wellness completed acquisition of Liberty Health Sciences in an all-stock transaction on February 26, 2021. The company plans to have 42 stores open in Florida by the end of 2021. The Florida medical cannabis market continues to show robust growth, with the Florida Office of Medical Cannabis Use reporting over 540,000 patients, like we saw on Sunday, registered patients as of April 23, 2021, up 61% year over year. So as TrueLeaf is number 1 in Florida, AYR Wellness is closely behind them there. Not closely, but behind them. And Cresco Labs announces previously filed base shelf prospectus and effectiveness of corresponding U.S. registration statement. So basically just reiterating to people that, hey, we are willing to hand out more shares. 100 million worth of people want to buy it. We announced this earlier in February. However, what they're focusing on with this is, as the legislative branch continues to make important incremental steps towards cannabis banking reform, Cresco Labs is getting prepared to capture the investor demand in the U.S., said Charles Bachtel, CEO of Cresco Labs. Our U.S. shelf registration statement is now effective, and over the coming months, we look forward to taking additional steps, such as reporting financials under GAAP, that will help enable us to uplist onto major U.S. exchanges as soon as permitted. Now, this is news out of New Mexico that I thought was just worth mentioning because, again, it's just expanding what people think of the plant. Enrollment explodes in northern New Mexico's college cannabis program. This is a tongue twister in itself right here. Mateo Frazier expected Northern New Mexico College's Cannabis Establishment Technician course to grow over time, but not in a matter of months. Frazier, director of the college's Arts, Films, and Media Department, said he knew people would be interested in an 8-week certification course that started in March because of what he called its provocative nature. He was happy 45 people took part in the initial course, but what he and others at the Española school are seeing from the summer and beyond blew his mind. In the past week, the number of registrants for the summer program exploded from 70 on April 19th to 130 as of Saturday. Frazier said the college has received 600 inquiries from people wanting to know more about the course. We haven't marketed, we haven't even pushed in marketing, said Frazier, who oversees the program. It's all about people who are just interested in it. The rapid growth of the program comes on the heels of Michelle Lujan Grisham signing House Bill 2 into law, setting in motion the legalization of cannabis for adult use 21 and over. Rick Bailey, president of Northern New Mexico College, which has 1,238 students, said he's not surprised by the sudden surge, adding that the college has worked for almost 2 years with Seedcrest, a state-based cannabis education provider, to develop a program that would eventually benefit from legalization. The initial course has broad focus: biology, history, the state's medical cannabis program, addiction issues, industry ethics. With the passage of HB2, Bailey said that the school can explore expanding the program. The foundational element
of the education program were based on the current existing medical cannabis industry, Bailey said. The focus was to help the workforce with education training that they needed, not just for the industry, but also to be of the greatest service of their community. So this is huge. Further proving that cannabis legalization is not all about the money. It's actually about serving the people, and the money, typically, when you serve people and solve problems, it follows behind. And on top of that, Senator Schumer to speak at New York City Cannabis Parade and Rally on March 1st. Obviously, this might be a little bit too soon for his few weeks remark, but apparently he'll be headlining this parade and rally on May 1st. The event will take place at Union Square Park. It will be preceded by the parade at 11 a.m. We're extremely excited about this, says event organizer Troy Smith. Senator Schumer is our senator and is a big supporter, the biggest supporter of cannabis law reform. And as you can see, he looks ready to rumble with the rest of the ignorant politicians, whether Democratic, whether Republican, just to try and talk some sense into them, teach them new information as his thinking evolved, as should theirs if they want to keep their job. But regardless, that is it for this week's episode. And let me know in the comments what you think. Do you think that the waves are getting a bit too choppy and that legislation will not pass? Or does all of this truth and all these facts on the ground help you realize that the narrative is changing and, slowly but surely this is likely going to become reality? Let me know what you think. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like on it. Subscribe if you don't want to miss any future videos, and I will catch you on Sunday for an episode of This Week in Cannabis News. Have a great day, everybody.